One of the times in my life that I experienced beloved community in an incredibly deep way was when I lived in Fort Worth, Texas. My family moved there in August of 2008 so that I could begin to serve a congregation of ours in Southlake, Texas in September. We quickly realized and understood that we were the only people on the street with an Obama bumper sticker. We were the only people on the street with an Obama yard sign. Our next door neighbors were young people, newlyweds, and our neighbors directly across the street from us were just retiring. They were all native Texans going back generations. Matt and Kay next door ran a small drilling company that did drilling for fracking operations. Billy Joe and Karen across the street were newly retired from the local public schools where she had been a teacher and he was the football coach. If you've seen the program Young Sheldon, he was the dad. That's who that guy was. They all owned guns. They were all going to vote for McCain. And to this day, they are the best neighbors I have ever had. Billy Joe and Katie were Army veterans. All of them attended the Methodist church in our neighborhood. When we first arrived and they discovered that we were Yankee transplants, they bought us a How to Speak Texan book. We learned from them there is no such thing as putting beans in Texas chili, just beef and sauce. We had beer and burgers frequently in their garages and driveways because people hung out in their garages and driveways. If you ever seen the show King of the Hill, this was King of the Hill. In the alley, the driveway, this is exactly how our neighborhood worked. They taught us to check outside our door before we went out in case there was a rattlesnake. They taught us how to deal with fire ants in our lawn. Forget your environmentalism. You're just going to poison those suckers. Okay. All right. And we did. They brought over gifts on our birthdays. When I broke my foot one year over the Christmas holiday, and my wife at the time was an elementary school teacher, it was really hard for her to take off work, they brought me to the doctor and to church and picked up our son from school. They'd knock on our door on a Saturday afternoon and say, "We're going to movies. Y'all want to go with us?" During harvest season, we would get bushels of shelled pecans from Matt's family ranch in San Angelo. At first, they thought of me with my Harvard graduate degree as an East Coast intellectual elitist, a no-good transplant Yankee carpetbagger, and I was certainly suspect for a while for my non-Christian religion. At first, I was afraid of that they were ignorant, racist rednecks. But I learned quickly from them and from my How to Speak Texan book that they were not rednecks, that rednecks tended to drive pickup trucks, waved Confederate flags, and used a lot of derogatory, racist, sexist, and other such terms. Rednecks resembled people to whom the term was first applied in the 19th century by rich white people, the rural poor white people, with skin, particularly the back of the neck, burned from too much sun exposure. And although Matt and Billy Joe did drive pickup trucks, they were more of what How to Speak Texan called a good old boy. Adult males in the Deep South who drank inexpensive American lagers, sometimes chewed tobacco, loved football, NASCAR, hunting, and fishing, and country music. not above an off-color joke or an occasional slur referring to others. They were also incredibly good-natured, kind, hardworking family guys. My neighbors were Hank Hill. And yes, our politics were different. Our cultures were different. And some of our fundamental attitudes and the way we saw the world were different. But we weren't just friendly with each other. We were friends and good neighbors. What we were was an example of beloved community. When we see the term, when we hear the term beloved community, we tend to picture some future idealistic type of society. Not a utopia per se, but certainly a place of like-minded people where all our treasured liberal progressive values are actually practiced, a place where justice and equity have been achieved. Beloved community might not be heaven, but it's as close as we're going to get. And unfortunately, that is not what beloved community is. That liberal utopia is an idealized version of beloved community. Because beloved community is a place where everyone belongs and no one is a lesser person, even though we may have differences. Hopefully, those differences are celebrated. Beloved community is not perfect community. It's genuine community. A community that realizes we need to have loyalty to each other because we are all in this together, regardless of our differences and where we might disagree. The actual term beloved community comes from a philosopher and theologian named Josiah Royce, who did his major work between 1885 and 1915. His idea of the beloved community was later popularized by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Royce's interest as a thinker and writer was in phenomenological approaches to studying religious experiences. Royce was at heart a communitarian who thought that the focus on individualism in American intellectual traditions and philosophy, in the line of Emerson and William James and such, was incredibly misplaced because it left out the important and balancing aspect of community. He believed enlightened individualism needed the balance of genuine, not perfect, genuine community. Now, granted, his expectations were certainly grounded in a white Euro-American worldview and preferences in existence. But his emphasis on the importance of community is quite substantial. He wrote, "Individuals without community are without substance, while communities without individuals are blind." Royce's beloved community was genuine community built on a set of loyalties. What Royce called the predatory loyalties, such as racism and nationalism and militarism, are replaced in genuine community by different values that are more inclusive and draw important aspects from different sources and cultures. We would call it moving towards multicultural diversity. Beloved community is a large, encompassing community of interpretation whose life compromises, he says, and unifies all the social varieties and social communities which we know are actually there, are actually real. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy writes about Royce's beloved community, saying that people must work out the hard way in the complex world of history and politics rather than in the deliberately simplified realm of theory what it means to be in community. It is the process of communicating and understanding one another in actual, imperfect, finite communities of grace, bound together by loyalty and striving toward the ultimate and ideal of beloved community. Following Royce, Dr. King's beloved community becomes a place where, he says, prejudices will one day be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood, and that poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will then not allow it. Beloved community is a journey and a process of working out difference, overcoming barriers we create for ourselves, recognizing mutual humanity and moving toward an ideal of true inclusive justice and equity together. The process of beloved community is intensely, incredibly, profoundly messy. If all we do is form community with people who already share our opinions, our culture, and our politics and our point of view, we will never get to beloved community. It will remain solely an ideal, as remote and removed as some heavenly afterlife with no real impact on the here and now of our lived shared existence. The pilgrimage to beloved community requires a shift in how we see each other, how we understand what it means to work for justice and equity and inclusion. We tend to generally operate out of a worldview that sees justice work through the lens of issues, of political sides, laws, competing rights claims. But the lens of doing justice through beloved community has the lens of relationship. That beloved community doesn't come from sharing the right or correct position on an issue or politics, but by being in healthy, right relationship with each other. We focus on being on the right side of an issue or the right side of history, such as reproductive choice or gay marriage, or genocide or terrorism or civil rights. But for lasting progress on all these issues must first come right relationship. When you and the other are sharing beloved community, you're in what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship. But when the other and ourselves are not in right relationship, we are what Buber called the I-it relationship. Our struggle, therefore, is to see each other as human, not to win our side of the issue. In the end, the most important thing or issue is, are we and us? Are we in right relationship? Does our community have what Royce will call genuine community? This is what Leela Watson, the Australian Aboriginal activist, meant when she said, and you've probably heard this, if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. That's beloved community. We now have a new Article 2 in our UUA bylaws. The 7 principles have been replaced by 7 values and the covenants we need to keep to ensure we practice them. In a sense, the covenants we keep to practice our values are right relationship. What the new Article 2 is doing for us is making the switch from right positions on issues, right philosophy, right thinking about what's right and wrong, to the relationships we must be in if we say we're practicing these values, and the covenants and promises we need to make with each other to make sure we achieve living out these values in reality, in our lives, in community. It's no longer good enough to say we believe in the dignity and worth of every person. We must forge a covenant with others that puts that love into practice, where we are in relationship with those who are different from us. It's no longer enough to say we value democracy in society and our congregations. We now have to find a way to make a covenant with those with whom we disagree in the democratic process and discourse. that recognizes our mutual humanity. Our new Article 2 moves us from having the right ideas to seeking to practice right relationship. And in that, I think it's very profound. And what I'm talking about is not any type of false equivalency. It's not that any opinion is okay in forming beloved community. If you enter community, it can't be genuine if you refuse to recognize someone as being equally human. That's the old saying about we can agree to disagree as long as your disagreement isn't about my humanity. Someone's humanity is not up for discussion. But I think we have a lot of people to work with who aren't really at that point. I think there's a lot more people who are reachable, who are able to be in beloved community with us, who we may write off at first because we don't stop and think deeply about what it is we're trying to do. In the parable of the good conservative, it is the person who helps the wounded person that is in right relationship. Not the people with the liberal values or the jobs working for liberal organizations or even the Unitarian Universalist minister. The person who's in right relationship is the person who drops everything they're doing to help the one who is in need. The people with our similar politics and worldviews and our lofty ideals and positions on issues in that story were unable to function out of right relationship. But it was the conservative who acted as if the hurt liberal was a thou, not an it, even with all the disagreements they shared with that person. And just like the parable of the Good Samaritan, the person who acts out of right relationship turns the story on its head. For it is the enemy, the other, who ends up doing what's right. And the way you heard that story today, the original hearers of that story understood Samaritans to be that person you thought the conservative was. That's why that story works so well in its original setting. There's a guy who wrote a book called The Year of Living Biblically, where he tried to live everything in the Old and New Testament. And one of the things he does is he goes to Samaria because there's a place called the Good Samaritan coffee shop, and he meets the owner. And of course, he asks the owner about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the owner tells him something that I've always thought was really profound, that he thinks the teller of the story was the person who got hurt and robbed, which I'd never heard of before I read that. I think that's a great perspective. Frequently, the Good Samaritan story is told from a systemic justice perspective these days that realizes we need to fix the road, not just do the right thing as an individual, so that the robberies and assaults won't happen. But we can only get to that systemic point of fixing the road if we are in right relationship with each other, because it's only then we can genuinely argue about what having a fixed road looks like. Until then, we're just arguing with each other about what our version of the fixed road looks like. If we find a way to be in right relationship with the other, we're going to find that the robbers on the road aren't there anymore. When we're in right relationship, we'll finally understand, as our story pointed out today, that no one should be our enemy, because we are all on the same side. There is no them. It's only us. And we all need to find a way to save ourselves. Thanks a lot for watching this video. It would help me out a great deal if you liked the video to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others, maybe ring that notification bell so you can be informed when we put out other videos like this. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.